Dun, dun. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Skeptical Inquirer Presents. This is a series of live online presentations from leading experts in science, skepticism, medicine, media, activism, all devoted to the cause of advancing science over pseudoscience, media literacy over conspiracy theories, and critical thinking over magical theory or thinking. Sorry. Every 2 weeks, Skeptical Inquirer Presents will bring you a new live event, and it's usually emceed by the brilliant and hilarious comedian Leanne Lord. But tonight, you got me. I am Kenny Biddle. I am the chief investigator here at CSI, and I'm filling in because Leanne just couldn't make it tonight. So I'm taking over. I have the calm, and I am going to have some fun tonight. Tonight, we are going to get into some Stranger Things. Since its debut in 2016, Stranger Things, now entering its fifth and final season, has been a pop culture phenomenon. It's actually a really good show. I love it. The show follows a group of friends in the 1980s in Indiana, and as they face epic threats against the very fabric of reality as we know it. Doesn't that build suspense? Along the way, they encounter secretive government laboratories, Cold War conspiracies, and individuals with incredible psychic powers. Because, it's science fiction. uh, where I lost my place. As amazing as the show storyline is, could any of these things be based in real life events from that time period? Tonight, we're going to find out. Tonight, we're going to explore this subject with Daniel Reed. He is the founder of the West Virginia Skeptic Society and a frequent contributor to Skeptical Inquirer magazine and the website. He works as a counselor during the day, but in his free time, Reed researches and investigates the world of the strange and unusual, because we are all strange and unusual. Uh, when he isn't exploring the facts behind an urban legend or investigating some mysterious cryptid, he regularly gives lectures and presentations promoting scientific skepticism and critical thinking. In fact, this weekend, he is hosting the first ever Skepticamp in West Virginia, featuring speakers like Susan Gerbic, Coleman Watts, Tim Vickers, and myself. Woohoo! I'm excited to be there. It's going to be a great time. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the screen over to Daniel Reed and let him take it away for the next 45 minutes.
Well, hello. Thank you. Thank you.
Hey!
I'm going to share my screen
Okay. You get
and
that
see if
going.
it accordingly.
And when it pops up, there it is. I see it. So I'm going to mute myself. I'm going to shut up and let you.
Okay. All right. Well, hello, everyone. And so this evening, what we want to do is we want to talk about Stranger Things, how Stranger Things mirrors real world searches for the paranormal. So in 2016, in 2016, we were introduced to the fine people of Hawkins, Indiana. And we found out that it was a quiet little town with a lot of secrets. But coming from a little town, I can tell you that it's not really that strange for a small town to have a lot of secrets. But the secrets here in Hawkins, Indiana, were quite different than the secrets that we have in my hometown. So after the show was introduced, in short order, it became a pop culture phenomenon. It spawned toys and it spawned clothing and it spawned collectibles and all manner of tchotchkes and bric-a-brac. And there's like even a Stranger Things cookbook that you can purchase. So the show really became this epic cultural phenomenon. So the question becomes, when I was asked to do this presentation, the question became, as I was thinking about it, what is it about the series that appeals to each of you? I mean, for example, was it the nostalgia? Did you grow up in that time period and you see the things that as they were, like much like myself? Was it the action and the intrigue? Was it the paranormal elements? Or is it or is it those things that really appeals to you if you were not of that age as I am? I have to say that for me personally, it's the socks. I mean, like, look at those socks. Those are socks. I had a whole drawer of those socks growing up. I mean, that was the cool kids wore those socks. That was like, no one questioned your life choices when you had socks like that. You just wore them. I mean, they were cool. And, I really miss those socks. But anyway, all right. So the storyline. If you look at the storyline, as Kenny mentioned just a wee bit ago, you have young people with amazing psychic powers. You have secret, shadowy, government-funded laboratories that are existing behind the scenes. You have elements of fringe science, and of course, the little bit of existential angst that is thrown in there as well. Actually, more than a little bit. And all of this set against the backdrop of the 1980s. So you have to ask yourself, what precisely was going on back then? I mean, if you think about where the 1980s are now in comparison, like, so when for people my age, it was when our grandparents used to talk about, or maybe even our parents, but our grandparents used to talk about how things were in the 1940s. So that's how far removed we are from the 1980s. So if to kind of understand where the show is coming from, we have to sort of go back. And to do that, I think we should hop into my handy dandy time machine and head on back to the 1980s for a second. Now, I know there's a bunch of you out there that's probably going, now, wait a minute, Daniel, wait a minute. You should have picked a different time machine. There was one that's better suited for the 1980s. There's the DeLorean from Back to the Future. So there it is. I've got that for you. But for me, my preference of time machine is the TARDIS. So in the 1980s, there was a little thing called the Cold War that was going on. And it was a period of geopolitical tension and rivalry that lasted from the late 1940s until the early 1990s between the United States and the Soviet Union and all of their respective allies. And so you're maybe asking yourself, well, what was this geopolitical tension and rivalry about? Well, pretty much everything. There was a deep ideological difference between the United States version of democracy and the Soviet Union's version of communism, and how they thought everything in the world should be run. I mean, it started with disagreements over how things should be in Europe after World War II. So you had all of those things going on, protests. You had all these specific ideologies that were being brought into the fray. And then, of course, you had that little thing called the nuclear arms race, which was a constant in my memory. I mean, it was one of those things where you were always, it was in the news every evening. All of this stuff was in the news every evening. We had three channels, NBC, ABC, CBS, and every evening, 6 o'clock, local news, 6:30, the national news, 11 o'clock, the local news came back on again. And it talked about all of this stuff. You would see the angst that and the questions and what is it that these other countries are doing. It was one of those times when you were kind of left wondering what they were up to and whether they were our government or a government of some other country. So basically, and again, this was constantly, there was a constant barrage, not like it is now where you can tune into the news 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You got it in snippets, but it was in the newspapers, it was on the telly, but it was this constant struggle between the United States and the Soviet Union for ostensibly what was unlimited power. I mean, there was even a song that was that the name of the song was "Everybody Wants to Rule the World." and it was one of the more popular songs of 1980 of the 1980s. It was 1985 when the song came out. But it wasn't all doom and gloom. I mean, there were some fun times in the 80s. And I will point out that this picture that I've got up right now, the one thing that I find to be um, historically inaccurate about this picture is the hair. Back in the 80s, ladies had much bigger hair than this. I mean, like, the hair was a lot bigger back then. But again, it wasn't all doom and gloom. We had some fun, and there were some really cool things and lots of innovations. I mean, cool things besides the socks. There is, for example, there was the Walkman. That was something that, all the trendy folks had. There were arcades that were developed. There were VCRs that came about. The first video recording devices came about that you could use to tape every episode of General Hospital when it came on. Yes, you and all your family could listen to what was going on with Luke and Laura and the Cassadines and Robert Scorpio. And you could see when, all these different stars came on they had the guest spots, like Elizabeth Taylor and so on and so forth. It was a really fun time. But even in General Hospital, there were instances of spies and intrigue between, Russia or I'm sorry, the Soviet Union and the United States. There were storylines that revolved around that. But there were other TV shows that were really good. There was MacGyver. There was The Fall Guy, which actually inspired me at one point in time to want to become a stuntman. There was also The Karate Kid that came out in 1984, which also inspired me to go into the martial arts. I was the original Daniel San. There's people to this day that still call me Daniel San because that was the year that I started my martial arts training. So there were all kinds of cool things to watch, but there was another side to our entertainment as well that focused on the struggle, which was either sometimes overarching or sometimes underlying the way of life that we knew and potential oblivion. So, for example, you had Red Dawn with Patrick Swayze, and it was a movie about America getting invaded. You had Matthew Broderick with War Games, which was about the technology of the time and actually how close with the War Games, how close in the movie that they came to annihilation. And then we have the movie that probably scared me singularly. It is probably the movie that has scared me more than any other movie that I've ever seen in my life. And it was called The Day After. And this was in 1983. And this was about the end of civilization, basically, as we know it. And it was hyped up. It was an ABC movie of the week. And it was hyped up, and it was one of these things, the must-see event. And so and we watched it, and that was our entertainment. But yet it also highlighted just how much existential angst there was. And it's still to this day, when I think about that time period, that's the movie that I think about. But there were other things that were going on then too. It was a decade where there was a lot of growing interest in the supernatural, in spiritual matters, in psychic powers, um, about questions about what lies beyond. The Time Life books came out with a series of 33 books, 33 volumes of their series, the mysterious world, mystic places, psychic powers. They had an entire, like I said, 33 series collection of those books that talked about all of these strange, bizarre, and mysterious things that people had questions about. You had Shirley MacLaine's book Out on a Limb that came out in 1983, but yet again, the ABC Movie of the Week, if I remember correctly, it was ABC, excuse me, they had a TV movie that they made out of it, which I watched in preparation when I did my research on this for this article. So this movie was about, her finding her spiritual self, about aliens, about other dimensions, about astral projection, about human potential beyond what we know, about psychics. Then there was, of course, the original miniseries that came out in 1983 about visitors from outer space. They came to visit Earth. They seemed friendly and nice, but yet they were actually these lizard people. And so again, it sort of emphasizes the what I guess is called the evilization of the other. And so there's always something out there that you can't quite trust. And in this particular case, it was something that you couldn't quite trust that came from outer space beyond what we know to be true. So in addition to those things, you also had folks like Uri Geller and James Heydrich that were on TV that were showing how all these amazing and marvelous powers that they had. Uri Geller could, bend spoons and metal bars, and James Heydrich was actually there was a TV show called That's Incredible. And this particular scene from this show that I have up on the screen right now is from December of 1980. He's showing using his alleged martial arts ability of chi and his projection of energy. In that particular shot, he's causing telephone pages to turn. And he also showed how he could make things move. He had like a pencil that was on a coffee table, and they would make it move back and forth. And when you were young, such as myself, at that point in time, you began to ask yourself, is it possible to learn how to do this? And so those are the things you actually begin having those questions. How can I do these things? Is it possible for me to learn this? Of course, both Uri Geller and James Heydrich were confronted. I don't want to say confronted, but confronted might be the best word, by James Randi later on. And you can look into those, but suffice it to say, Randi took the wind out of their sails, as it were. So, but back to the storyline of Stranger Things. You look at these elements, young people with amazing psychic powers. So there's people in real life who are demonstrating alleged possible psychic abilities. You've got secret government-funded laboratories. You've got elements of fringe science, and you've got the definite existential angst. You throw that in with the nostalgia, the action and the intrigue, and the paranormal, and throw that in the time frame of the 1980s, and you've got Stranger Things. And so you start to think about it though, and you say, okay, so this sounds like a good storyline for a science fiction show, science fiction fantasy. But when you start to look at like some of those things that I pointed out, you start to look at Stranger Things, you find out that there's actually a little thread of truth that runs through Stranger Things upon which it is based. Some of the storyline is actually based. And you're saying, okay, so let's get to the meat of this. What are you talking about, Daniel? I'll give you an example. The Stargate Project. Now, we're not talking about the Stargate Project, like the TV show Stargate, where they traveled around the universe or the galaxy using stable wormholes. That's not the Stargate we're talking about. What we're talking about is Project Stargate, which was one of a program, a government program that focused on using psychic powers to gain a tactical advantage over, well, everyone else. The beginnings of this started in the earlier in the 70s, but in 1971, there was a book that documented the Soviet Union's supposed breakthrough in psychic research. And of course, fearing that we were getting behind the Soviets in what they were able to accomplish, our intelligence agencies, our military started to look into it for themselves. And they started to put some money into this and to, um, you know, look into the possibilities, start doing the research, find out what other people could do. And so what can our people do? Now we know this really actually happened because Mark Mansfield, a CIA spokesperson in 1985, no, I'm sorry, 1995, came out and confirmed this in an article for the Associated Press. The problem was he also went on to say that it was found to be unpromising. And so it was in those days that in the late 1970s, they abandoned the project entirely. But never to be one deterred by a lack of empirical evidence, the military took up the quest, the Defense Intelligence Agency to be specific, and rebranded the project, the work that they were doing, that the CIA had been doing, as Project Stargate. And they poured millions of dollars into it. Well, now, of course, I have a picture from the movie there, The Men Who Stare at Goats, which was a satire. But in reality, you have these folks, Joseph McGonigal and Ingo Swann. If you look into their background, it says that Joseph McGonigal, he was the first person recruited for the classified program now known as the Stargate Project, along with his colleague Ingo Swann. They are best known for their claims surrounding the investigation of remote viewing and the use of paranormal abilities for military intelligence gathering. So, what is remote viewing? That's a question that some people might have. Well, you remember in Stranger Things when L11, the character 11, would go into a sensory deprivation tank or a sensory deprivation state. She would put a blindfold on, maybe listen to some white noise. That was, she would then take her mind and she would go check in on other people. That's remote viewing. You're seeing what's going on there at a distance, which is different than astral projection, as I understand it. Astral projection is when your soul or your spirit actually leaves you. So you have an empty vessel now. Your body's an empty vessel, and it goes to a different place, and it can transcend the dimensions, and it can go to these other places and other times, and so on and so forth. Whereas remote viewing, your soul stays attached, but your mind is what is being, you're looking at a distance, you're remotely viewing something that's going on over there, wherever there might be. And they were the folks from Project Stargate were given coordinates, and they were asked to, check in on what was happening at those coordinates, allegedly. So that is what remote viewing is. So what were the objectives? So that now that we know a little bit about what they were doing some other things as well, but that's the sort of the thing that connects with Stranger Things. But what were the objectives of Project Stargate? Well, they were going to monitor the psychic research programs of other nations and their efforts in psychic warfare and intelligence gathering. They were going to provide a team of remote viewers like 11 who could be called upon by any government agency needing assistance gathering intelligence. And I'm thinking, I know the Department of Education probably didn't exist at that point as we know it now, but nevertheless, I'm thinking, what would the Department of Education use that for? Number three, they also looked at continuing the research into psychic phenomenon that was conducted before the program's transfer to the department or to the Defense Intelligence Agency. So they used remote viewing, but what did they use it for? Well, we know based upon some of the research that's come out and some of the reports that came out that they used it to attempt to find Gaddafi before the 1986 bombing of Libya. They attempted to use remote viewing to locate Brigadier General James L. Dozier in Italy. They also attempted to find a missing airplane in Africa. These are just the things that we know about. And so the project continued, the testing continued, the sessions continued, and at least until 1985, when Ray Hyman, one of the a psychologist, and he's one of the original founders of PsyCop, which later became CFI, which is the Skeptical Inquirer magazine's home agency. He was brought in to conduct an outside evaluation of Project Stargate. So we ask ourselves, how successful was it? There are a few things that really jumped out at me, but the conclusions that he came to were this. Two clear-cut conclusions emerged from our examination of the operational component of the current program. Number one, evidence for the operational value of remote viewing is not available, even after a decade of attempts. So during all this time, if you looked at the evidence and you looked at it in a very empirical way, there was nothing of substance there. And his second conclusion was, it is unlikely that remote viewing, as currently understood, even if its existence can unequivocally be demonstrated, that it will prove of any use in intelligence. So therefore, he concluded that continued support of the operational component of the current program was not justified. And so in 1986 or 1996, it just sort of went away. Now, if you would like to read more about his findings and the inquiry that he did into the project, you can find that information in the March-April 1996 issue of the Skeptical Inquirer. He also includes a paragraph, or includes the conclusion section in the final few pages of that article. So it's really interesting and I would encourage you to check that out. So what else was going on during that time period? What other ways do stranger things parallel the real world? Well, there's Project Alpha. So let us look at the story. A long time ago, in a university far, far away, there was a lab in Hawkins. No, the lab really wasn't in Hawkins. This is the lab in Hawkins. This is what it looks like on the TV show. But in reality, there really was a lab. But the grounds of the laboratory, instead of looking like this, looked more like this. And they really did test kids. They were looking to test young people. But instead of looking like that, they tended to look more like this. So it was in 1979 that the McDonald Laboratory for psychical research was established at Washington University in St. Louis by this fellow. This fellow that's coming up, James S. McDonald, gave them a $500,000 grant. This fellow right here. Now, the person that was leading up that research was this fellow, and his name was Peter R. Phillips. He was interested in investigating the existence of psychic abilities through controlled experimentation and observation. Now, the key thing that really jumps out to me with that is through controlled experimentation observation. That's key, and that will play into the story in just a minute. But he and his group were also extremely interested in testing children who could allegedly bend metal objects using only the power of their mind. So then we have James Randi. Enter James Randi, who, upon learning of the study, saw an opportunity to test the scientific rigor of this type of research. And then he teamed up with these two, Steve Shaw and Michael Edwards. both of whom had contacted him independently. Steve Shaw was a part-time magician and mentalist from Washington, Pennsylvania. Actually, as I think about it, not too terribly far within, might be three hours from here where I live. Um, the other chap, his name was Michael Edwards, and he was a student in Marion, Iowa, where he was a well-known magician. He performed magic acts about there. So they got together and they formulated a plan. Randy encouraged them to apply to the program, but they established well in advance of the experiment that a few sort of rules. They decided that it would end at a certain time. They would establish a time where it would be revealed that what they were doing was a deception. And it was also agreed upon that if anyone ever asked Steve Shaw or Michael Edwards if they were using tricks, that they would immediately answer yes, and we were sent here by James Randi. And then they would go on to answer any and all questions that any of the researchers had about the entire plan. And this was called Project Alpha. So there were actually about 300 people that applied to Project Alpha, and toward the end of the process, they actually had it whittled down from the 300 to the two. But the thing was, the researchers there didn't really know anything about the boys' backgrounds, no, like the fact that they were magicians. So they really didn't know anything about their secret identities, so to speak, or their connection to James Randi. So the study was set to begin, but before it did, Randi sent a list of 11 caveats concerning the testing and how it was to be done. And I say to myself, he sent them 11 caveats. 11. I'm quite positive that those two things have no correlation, but I thought it was kind of cool. So at any rate, so the caveats that Randi sent, he warned them not to let the subjects run the experiments by altering any of the protocols. He suggested that any capricious demands that they may have might mean that they were introducing conditions that into the experiment that would let them perform some kind of trickery. But it was just sort of like, that's all right. They basically ignored most of Randy's suggestions. Over the time that they were there, the boys demonstrated their abilities to bend, in this particular case, it looks like a key, but bend spoons, metal rods, manipulate objects and that were sealed in containers. And they were also able to divine the contents of sealed envelopes. Over the time that they were there, they absolutely amazed the researchers. Here's an article from the not Skeptical Inquirer, the National Enquirer, about Michael Edwards. And you know how memory, we don't really necessarily know how memory, how it stays intact. But I swear I can remember seeing this in the National Enquirer back in the day, because admittedly it was one of my guilty pleasures. My grandmother had a subscription to this, and I remember seeing this, and there were always stories about psychics and ghosts and hauntings and how you can increase your psychic powers and so on and so forth. This singular story, again, it was one of those things that made me wonder, how is it maybe I could learn to do this? And it played a part in my youth. But for 3 years, these boys amazed the researchers. But the problem was they were using chicanery, trickery, and sleight of hand to do it. And the researchers didn't really know the difference. They didn't know the difference at all. As a matter of fact, Randi kept saying, "You might be getting fooled. I've got some suggestions for you." He even offered to come to act as a consultant for the program for free on his own dime. But they turned him down. Phillips was like, "Nah, we've got this." And So in the end, it was sort of like, they believed that these two young men were absolutely the real deal. Well, much like um, the aptly titled final episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation, all good things must come to an end. And so it was that in July of 1991, Randy began leaking hints of the existence of Project Alpha during a magician's conference in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Randy said that Phillips finally reached out to him and for the first time, just prior to the conference, had asked for his assistance. Randy said that Phillips had requested that he provide some videotape of fake psychokinetic metal bending, PK. That's one of the terms that they use in mentalism, PK. Metal bending, and asked how it was performed. And Randy readily provided that. He showed them specifically how various and sundry feats could be performed. Randy said that although Phillips was shaken by the information that he was provided, that he did take it to heart. And he went back to the laboratory and decided that there were going to be some changes in the testing protocols. Well, testing continued for a while, but guess what? Shaw and Edwards soon discovered that under these new conditions, they weren't able to use the simple trickery that they were using previously to replicate their earlier feats. And so it was, the McDonald Research Group decided that they would maybe reassess their findings. In the end, Randy said that ultimately researchers essentially recovered themselves by reversing rather positive convictions that they had held fully. Now, if you want to read more about this in Randy's own words, you can check out the fall 1983 issue of Skeptical Inquirer for Randy's full story. It's a amazingly interesting article. Uh, I would highly recommend it. It's available online. Or if you want to get yet another perspective on it, you can go to the World's Greatest Con podcast by Brian Brushwood, where the World's Greatest Con podcast, and to hear the Project Alpha story as told from the perspective of Stephen Shaw, aka he went on to become the mentalist Banachek, and Michael Edwards. Brian, whom I met this past summer at Dragon Con, interviews them, and you can hear it. You can read it from Randy's perspective in the article, and you can hear it from their perspective in their interview with Brian, or you can actually hear Brian interview both of them at this year's SciCon, the 50th anniversary at SciCon in Buffalo, New York, June 11th through the 14th, 2026. I know I personally am very excited about it. You can also see Banachek perform live. He's going to be performing one evening as well. And I know this is all great, good, well, and exciting, but wait, there's more. If you're really interested in this, if you there's an article in the most recent edition or issue of Stranger Things where I go into more detail about all of these things that we've talked about this evening. And also, I talk about the Satanic Panic and how it was affecting the storyline of Stranger Things and how it is connected to the 1980s as well. And I do really think that I should probably get me one of those shirts. Yes, I think I'd look rather fetching in one of those. But anyway, in conclusion, we look back at the 1980s with our refined sensibilities and we think to ourselves, really? They'd spend money on that kind of thing? With these spurious claims and this or spurious evidence and unsubstantiated claims? But then you have to ask yourself, are they really that much different than we are today? I mean, let's think about what we're doing in today's world, where we have UFOs, the congressional hearings where we're spending who knows how much money on congressional hearings related to UAPs. And if you look at who's at the table in these hearings, excuse me, who's at the table in these hearings, it's very interesting to note who is not at the table. And we know that Randy is no longer with us, but in his absence, there are others who are quite well qualified. Mick West, Neil deGrasse Tyson, people who the public trusts and who can bring skepticism and critical analysis into this process. And those are the folks that are not being asked the questions or asked to participate. Which, to be very clear, it's not to say that these things shouldn't be examined or studied, because they should. I mean, that's what I do. That's what Kenny does. That's what Ben Radford does. They should be studied, but they should be studied with reason, science, and a healthy dose of skepticism. So here are my references for this evening's presentation. There's quite a few. There's more actually in the magazine. Here is where you can reach out to me if you would like to do so. The links take you to my Skeptical Inquirer authors page. There's my personal webpage and the West Virginia Skeptic Society webpage. So thank you all very much for choosing to spend a little bit of time with me here this evening. Thank you.
All right. Let's see. There we go. I'm back. That was great, Daniel. Good job.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're
Hmm.
welcome. So I got a couple statements. I got a couple things to say.
Okay.
First and foremost, I have the entire collection of the Mysteries of the Unknown. It is right back, right there on the bottom shelf here. I have the entire collection, thanks to Tim Binga, our librarian. Um, Excellent series. Loved it. I absolutely loved it. Um, I want to also say that in the beginning of your presentation, you mentioned like, why do we love Stranger Things? Is it the nostalgia? Is it the action? Is it the paranormal themes? And I say yes. Um, I love it all. I think it's great. I really think that the writers of that series have taken the essence of the 1980s conspiracy theories and inject it just enough where it's not overwhelming, but it's just enough to capture our attention, and
Right.
we want to see what's going on. Like we get invested in the characters, and I
Well,
love that.
it's fresh and new to the people today, like the younger people today, but to people, old people like us,
Like
I
you.
mean, the, uh, it's memory. I mean, that's
Right.
those things that you see on there. That was how it was. Those children, that feral almost, where they'd say, go play, be back at dark, that sort of thing. That
Right.
happened. So it's not, some kids today might look at it and go, oh, people aren't going to let their kids run around like that. They'd be reported to CPS or something. But no, that's how it was.
Yeah, I mean, I was talking with my wife the other night, and we were talking about how like we were told to get out of the house, get
Hmm.
outside, and as long as you were home before the streetlights came on, or
Hmm.
right as the streetlights came on, you were fine. You didn't get in trouble, but you got beat if you if you came home too late. I think all of us did that. I also want to say that you hit on some examples like Red Dawn, War Games,
Hmm.
classic films, and they also took the essence of the time
Right.
and really brought in um, the current events that were going on and played on our fears. But again, not too much, but just enough.
Just
And
enough. Yeah.
yeah, and
Yep.
so I do have a couple questions here,
Okay.
or at least one question. Oh, yeah, more are popping up. This is great. I love it. People are getting into it. So let me ask you a couple questions. Uh, one of the reasons, this is from Massimo. One of the reasons Stranger Things was set in the 1980s is because and not all cell phones and not only didn't exist back then. Oh wait. I'm sorry, it was typed weird. Cell phones didn't exist back then. But
Right.
how much has technology changed paranormal research and investigation? Oh, that's a good
Oh,
question.
that's a very good
I'm
question.
excited. I want to hear your answer.
Oh, I'm going to defer to the expert, who would be
Oh,
you.
this is your show, buddy.
Well, I mean, my gosh, it's the cell phones. I mean, there's all these different apps and there's all this different equipment and there's techno. I mean, nowadays we're able to carry in our pockets, we're able to carry more computing power than was originally used to put the first spacecraft on the moon. I mean, there's more computing power in this little thing I have in my hand than
Right,
was on the initial. So the amount of technology that we have now and what we're able to do with it, it's just it would be. I look back at the Daniel that existed back then, and I think that Daniel would be absolutely enthralled with everything that we're able to do with technology now. Um,
right,
but in terms of looking into the paranormal, like I guess first of all we have to if we want to get into the semantics of it, we have to define what paranormal is. You know, is it actually above what is the norm? And if it's outside the norm, can we really test it? Because if it's existing within our normal world, then it's not paranormal. It's just something that we need to figure out how to test, if that makes
right,
sense.
right.
So, um, so when you look at the technology that's available, I it's it's a very sticky question, and it's actually one that would probably take me a lot longer to answer than we have time for here this evening.
Right.
But I would recommend, and I hate it that he's sitting here listed. He's the one that's sitting. And this is what I do when people ask me these sorts of questions. I say, go look up the articles and the things that that Kenny's done about REM pods, about the how people could collect EVPs, and look and see what is really probably the underlying um, cause of what they're deeming paranormal, as opposed to what really truly paranormal is. Because I know what everybody thinks paranormal. I mean, it's one of those words that everyone uses, but I think that if you really start to dissect it, it doesn't necessarily mean the same thing to everyone.
Yeah, it's a placeholder
Yeah,
where everyone kind of has an understanding, a basic understanding of what it means, but they can't define it.
right. It's like
Eh,
critical thinking.
Right? Yeah.
What critical thinking? I mean, Bertha Vasquez and we were talking past each other because one time because of the fact her perspective of what critical thinking was and what my perspective of critical thinking was were different. Mine is more involved skeptical thinking, whereas hers involved like data analysis and working with models and things that are specific and endemic to the sciences. Whereas I was looking at it more from a cognitive biases perspective. And so we were using the same words, but we were talking past each other for a bit.
I would add to this before we move on that technology is great. I love the advancements in technology, and it helps us to do much better research. I mean, we both can sit here from our chairs in our offices, and we can research an inventory, a vast inventory of newspaper articles and research papers just from here. We don't have to go through microfilm at local
Right.
libraries and stuff like that. But on the flip side of that, be careful because so many people that are into it as a hobbyist or an enthusiast
Right.
will they use technology, which is usually just novelty items and toys that aren't made to actually measure much at all, and they use them as if they're being scientists. And there's a lot more to it than just having a gadget that beeps and lights up. So good question. All right, let's move on. So this one is from Brian Engler. Hey Brian, how you doing?
Hey, Brian.
Uh, he says, no question, Daniel, but as a guy who grew up in the 50s and 60s, I love this show and thought it could as easily been set in a time frame earlier than the 1980s. I was glad to see your conclusion that makes me realize critical thinking was pertinent in the 80s, but also now throughout all our lives. Thanks. Oh, that's nice. That was really nice of him. Brian's a nice guy. I like him.
Nice guy.
So Daniel Fisher says, does the does the upside down central to the story correspond to any actual weird beliefs people held in the 1980s?
Well, there were beliefs of other dimensions, and there were like for example, if you watch Shirley MacLaine's book or watch her book, if you
Watch
watch
her.
the movie based upon her book, she talks about these aliens that were here, and they were from another place, and then they talk. There's I distinctly remember the '80s being. We talked about alternate dimensions and things like that, and how you could reach it with astral projection and so on and so forth. Because I was really into that stuff back then, and
Me too.
I desperately tried to astrally project, and one time I thought I did, and which was a really weird experience. Yeah, I was asleep. I was asleep. No, I was asleep on the couch, and I thought I literally I had the experience of floating up out of my body, going through there. But that's what I was thinking about before I dozed off,
Right.
and I had the feeling of falling back into my body, and it was a weird thing, but it was a dream. It was
Did you do the whole
yeah.
shake the
I
head?
jumped. I was like, what the heck? And then I tried to do it again. I was mad because I couldn't. Um,
That's good. Um, okay, so let me see. Another question. Don't you think more people should know James Randi's work?
yes, I think everyone. I mean, Randy. To me, James Randy is the real life Albus Dumbledore. He is like, I mean, seriously. If you look at him and his work, and the first time I was ever introduced to Randy was on the Happy Days. He
Oh
was on
yeah.
the Happy Days, and that's what. And then, of course, later on, then I read his books and I saw things he did, and I saw where he appeared on stuff. And so, yeah, Randy's stuff is still pertinent today as it ever was.
That's awesome. And I agree. I think more people should read his work and understand where he was coming from. I think sometimes he gets a bad rap because
Hmm.
he was very aggressive,
Yeah,
and I think that you needed that at the time,
right.
because I always mention that when we're dealing with people that claim to be psychic or dowsers or have some kind of superpower or super ability, they are really confident, overconfident in what they can do, and that shows in how they approach the audience.
Hmm.
So we have to meet that in kind. I think. I think we have to show the same kind of confidence and aggressiveness sometimes, not all the time, but
Right.
sometimes to get the point across.
Well, and he
Um,
was criticized. Randy was criticized even by skeptics at that
yeah,
time, and what you're doing, what you did was unethical. And but basically, he was like, this needed to be done to show people that they were not as um, savvy to the way of tricksters as they thought they were. I mean,
right.
if you go out and you search some different YouTube videos on Project Alpha and listen to Randy at that time talking about it, he really makes the case that this needed to be done. And sadly, there's things that are happening today where we're a little bit less likely to do those things because we're a bit more of a litigious society than we were back then.
Yeah,
But
yeah. I agree though. And I think things like that are necessary. And yeah, we don't do it as I guess out in the open like that,
right,
but we do it more behind the scenes.
right,
And really have to cross our T's and dot our I's to make sure everything is in place before you do something like that. Because there is that problem with backlash. I mean, no
right.
matter what you do and your intention, there's going to be a group of people that give you negative feedback on it, and usually really strongly. I have a question that I'd
Okay.
like to sneak in here at the end. Um, so I found your article fascinating. I loved it. I loved how it corresponded with themes in the show and real world events, and
Hmm.
especially when it came to the propaganda. I would say propaganda. The book that came out of the Soviet Union
Hmm.
about the psychic discoveries. And have you had a chance to read that book?
I read a portion of it when I was up there in the
Okay.
library. Um,
Oh, okay, good. Yeah. What did you think? Like I started reading a little bit because I hadn't read it before.
mhm.
And this is a topic that's been coming up recently in the last like 2 weeks. I've been asked several times about the studies and the videos that were the film that was snuck
Right.
out showing all these I forget her name.
The
There was
lady with the salt shaker and she moved the salt
yes,
shaker. Yeah,
yes.
yeah,
And
yeah.
as soon as I saw the videos, I was like, she's doing magic tricks. I've seen these
Right.
exact. I've been standing next to Banachek when he did some of these tricks, so I know what I'm looking at. But um, do you think a lot of this book could possibly be just based on anecdotes and maybe propaganda that was coming out?
Because I mean, if you look like even the skeptical or not skeptical inquirer, the National Enquirer article, it talks about how the one person was, they said, and she was holding the rod in her hand and it bent to a 40 some degree angle. And so people's perceptions of of what happens is not necessarily what the magician, the trick at Randy says at one point in time, you could, the lab could be set up for 4 o'clock for the event to be studied, but the trick could be done done at 3:30.
Right.
So, and then you've got the perceptions of the people, what they think they're seeing as opposed to what they're really seeing. And then
Hmm.
you've got the memory of it. So yeah, I think that at number one, a lot of it was blatantly propaganda just to oh, look what we can do. Or
Right.
and number two, it was a misrepresentation. It may be a post hoc sort of explanation, post hoc ergo propter hoc. For example, like like I did another article a while back about my great grandmother who could remove warts and she could stop bleeding and she could do all these things. Well, she didn't really do that, but that all these stories are around about how she did that. And so there's explanations for how those things happen, but that's not the stories. And you have to sort of cast a skeptical eye on that and say,
Right.
what's the reality behind this? But
Right. Her name was Nina Kalugnia or
yeah,
Klugina. Yeah, I'm butchering that name. I know it. Uh, but yeah, I was recently sent those videos and horrible videos,
yeah,
overexposed and just blurry, bad angles. So, but you could
maybe
see,
perfectly.
yes. Oh yeah, I agree. I
Yeah,
agree. Like that alien autopsy.
yeah, yeah. But see, I remember seeing those back in the day. I couldn't tell you when I saw them because but I do remember seeing them back then, and I thought to myself, my gosh, look at the powers that these people have. How could I learn to do this?
Right.
So,
That's cool. Okay. So, there's a comment from Carolyn Dougherty. I know Carolyn. Hi,
yes.
Carolyn. I remember unsolved mysteries, profiling psychic abilities, and so-called experts in the field as a kid. That made them seem legit at a
Mhm.
time, at the time, and fed my curiosity. P.S. Eddie Munson lives.
Yes,
So
Eddie
that's
Munson lives. Eddie's the guy.
wow. Okay. All right. So we're at the end. We made it to the end. We got all the questions. Um, everyone that's watching, if you're in the West Virginia area, the Clarksburg, right? Clarksburg area.
Mhm.
Yes. Please come out this weekend when the West Virginia Skeptic Society is hosting their first, hopefully annual, Skeptic Camp with a bunch of speakers. I'll be there. Daniel will be there. Coleman Watts, Tim Vickers, Susan Gerbic. Um, who else?
Gerald Turner, John Michael, uh,
Yes, John without an H. Yes.
Gerald Turner, Chris Osborne, Sarah Blosser. She's the archivist for the Gray Barker collection, which, yeah, that's going to
I'm
be.
waiting. Yeah, I want to get in there. I can't wait to see that. See
Oh,
that.
you don't have enough time. You're going to you would take a week to go through that.
I might have to stay an extra night just to go through that. But thank you everyone for hanging out and make sure to go to skepticalinquirer.org, subscribe to the magazine because there's lots of good stuff in here. This is the latest issue with Daniel shares the cover. So he's got his Stranger Things article on the cover. It's awesome. Please go subscribe because that helps keep the lights on here. And we will see you in 2 weeks for the next presentation. And remember, never stop learning. And I will see you all later. Bye, Daniel.
All right.